You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the columnist Carole Malone and the editor of the Courier in Dundee, David Clegg. They'll be with us from now right up until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Metro's front page focuses on missing mother Nicola Bulley's family, hitting out about speculation over her personal life. Their headline, just focus on finding Nikki. It's the same story for The Sun. Don't be afraid, Nikki, come home. The Daily Mail focuses on the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman's intervention in the case. David's paper, The Courier, has an exclusive as the SNP deputy leader, John Swinney, tells them he won't stand in the contest to replace Nicola Sturgeon as Scotland's First Minister. The Financial Times reports on speculation that an unscheduled trip to Belfast by Rishi Sunak could mean a post-Brexit Northern Ireland Protocol agreement is signed soon. That's also the main story for The Telegraph. And The Star offers an analysis of Britain's sleeping habits. Unflatteringly, they compare us all to zombies. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Carole Malone and David Clegg. Welcome to both of you. Let us start with the Metro and their headline, just focus on finding Nikki, and this coming at a point where police have been heavily criticised after finding no sign of her after 3 weeks of their investigation. Also, the investigation being criticised as well. Carole.
I mean, you know, we were talking about this about 10 days ago. The police were operating in a very bizarre way. Usually when someone goes missing in this way, there are very clear guidelines which are followed, and Lancs police don't appear to have followed any of them. You know, their press conferences, at one point they didn't have a press conference for 7 days, which I find astonishing because David will know this. If someone's gone missing and it's a big high-profile case, the press need to be given details every day to keep up public interest, so people keep looking. That didn't happen. You know, we've had the police revealing today that she had drug and alcohol problems and had problems with the menopause. I mean, this is just, you know, this is intimate personal information that should never have been released. Perhaps if she had mental health issues, say that. Don't talk about her HRT and her menopause. It's upsetting for the family. They are beside themselves at the moment. They said they knew release some details, but not what they actually have. You know, and the police seem to be playing the blame game. I think they're releasing these details. This was to divert attention from their bungling incompetence on this case. You know, they released these details in the beginning, not about menopause, but about her being vulnerable. This might have made a difference to the way the search was carried out. But they're kind of doing it piecemeal. It just seems to me it's like they've never done it before. You had Detective Superintendent Rebecca Smith appeared at a press conference the other day in a dress that looked like she was going to a cocktail party. It was outrageous. I was thinking, do you guys know how to conduct an investigation? She was trying to blame TikTok, saying they were putting her team off from doing their job. Well, TikTokers shouldn't be putting their team off from doing their job. They should know how to be doing their job. Now we know that they're being questioned. We're saying today they've referred themselves to the IOPC. Not entirely true, because the IOPC were already looking at to see if an investigation was warranted. So they've referred themselves before they were hauled into it. It's just been a disaster from start to finish.
Yes, and it's the repercussions of the police action that the family is saying that they're aware that Lancashire Police released a statement with some personal details and saying that Nicola would not have wanted this. And there are people out there threatening to sell stories about her.
Yes, I think it must be extremely upsetting for the family. And it does seem like this has been a failure of execution with the police. I think every journalist who runs a newspaper who deals with their local police on stories like that realises that there are operational reasons for things that they can tell you and that they can't tell you. and that they always very much should have the interests of the families that are affected by whatever the situation is in how they go about that. Now, that is more complicated when you do have social media, where you do have a lot of conspiracy theories that were floating around on social media, and the impact that was having. The police have an obligation to control that, to deal with that, and work through that in the best way possible. And I think what is clear here is that they got it wrong early on. They didn't have that private conversation with journalists that goes on a lot, where they said, where they can say, here's what's going on in the background. Please let that steer your coverage, but don't publish these details because they would be unhelpful or upsetting. And then that has then forced them into a situation where they've had to reveal more than what the family would want, what would normally be the case. And I think we've seen by the widespread reaction to that, and through a lot of political on both sides, Labour and the Conservatives, concerned about what's going on there. And it is very unusual for politicians to talk so starkly about the operational execution of a police investigation. So I think that shows that something has gone wrong here, and it's probably something that will need to be looked at more thoroughly afterwards.
Yeah, well, we're going to come on to Suella Braverman's comments, but the Sun covering the family's direct appeal to Nicola to come home. We all need you home, they say. Carole?
Yeah, and I hope to God she's still able to come home. I hope she's watching this coverage and able to come home. But having seen the details of the stuff that's been released today, that could hamper that if she is still with us. I don't know what the police thought they were how it would move the investigation on by releasing details about her stopping taking her HRT and her menopause. If she is out there and she is in a state, that's going to put her off coming home. They've done more damage than good here. Her partner has been talking very early on and asking police to search the fields, search the surrounding areas, search people's houses. But the police in Lancashire seem to have decided what happened to Nicola. They seem to have decided right from day one that she slipped into the water, that's what happened to her. And although they've said from the start they're open-minded about everything else, they haven't been open-minded at all. To
the Mail, David, and as we'd made mention of briefly before, Suella Braverman not happy at all with the police handling of the case, has concerns about that decision by Lancashire Constabulary to release that highly personal information. It's quite unusual for the Home Secretary to get involved in a police investigation at this stage, isn't it?
Almost unprecedented, I think, that they would talk in that terms with a live investigation. You often hear subsequently or after events have concluded that they may reflect on what happened and make comments of this nature. But I think for Suella Braverman to talk this explicitly about her concern about the way it's happening, and this is not the detail of what steps they're taking to look for Nicola. It's about what they're releasing to the media, what they're releasing publicly, the way that is being done. And I think that reflects the deep concern about not only the impact that could have on the people involved in this situation, but also other people in similar circumstances who dread the idea of this type of private information ever being made available about them. So I think there is probably a conversation to be had about whether the Home Secretary should be publicly commenting that publicly on a live police investigation. Even those who agree with her comments may have some concern about that, because there does need to be operational independence of the police in these types of situations. And even the Home Secretary won't be aware of every granular detail of the investigation as the way those who are leading it will be. So we'll see how that pans out, I think, in the weeks and months ahead. But certainly I think this has raised a lot of wider questions about how the police operate in the new media climate that we're in now. I think it's almost certainly the case that their decisions have been driven by the types of fevered speculation, that unchecked speculation that now can go viral on social media, how they calculate what their priorities are in those situations as far as stamping out rumours, making it clear what's going on while retaining people's privacy and calculating what is useful for the public to know as far as aiding the investigation is concerned and what is not. I don't think there's no doubt that these are difficult judgments. The police deal with them every day across the country. Journalists wrestle with similar issues every day across the country. But it certainly feels like when we get to the stage of the news that we're seeing today that something's gone badly wrong.
Interesting point that you raise, David. Carole, do you think that the Home Secretary should be passing comment on a live police investigation?
Yes, I do, because I feel she's had to intervene because the police are not doing this very well. And I hear what David just said there about them, judging what they do and how they conduct their investigation by what's happening on social media. That should not be the case. That's a diversion. They should have a plan of how they're going to try and find her. And looking at what people are saying on social media, that's just a petty diversion. Forget what they're doing. Do your job and try and find her. Don't be judging and thinking how I'm going to conduct it this way because of what's happening on TikTok. And this woman, Rebecca Smith, actually mentioned TikTok and said that they were disturbing her investigation. That's nonsense. Nothing should deter them from investigating.
There obviously has been sustained backlash over them revealing Ms Bulley's struggles with alcohol and the menopause. And women's campaigners are saying that officers were in fact trying to hide their own incompetence by revealing these extra details. I mean, would you agree with that, David?
Sorry, could you say that again? I didn't quite catch that. I was having a bit of sound trouble there.
OK, yeah, sorry. I was just saying that the police revealing the details about her struggles with alcohol and the menopause, it's caused women's campaigners to say that it's really because officers are trying to hide their own incompetence and that's why they're revealing these further details now.
I think it's certainly the case that when they're doing it at this stage, you have to wonder, well, what else has changed to think that it's now operationally useful for them to do that? It's very strange for it to happen after that length of time. I think it almost certainly reflects the fact that the way the information flow had went earlier in the investigation had been problematic, that it feels like something that's maybe been done in panic. I've heard some people questioning about who exactly had sign-off from this. My understanding is the first mention of it came in a press release. Who exactly had sight of it, who made the decision. I think there is a lot of questions to be answered there. And certainly when you get to this type of situation where it seems pretty clear that mistakes have been made, they almost certainly have been engineered by previous mistakes earlier on in the chain. Now, whether it was an attempt to cover them up, I'm not certain I would like to draw that conclusion at this point. But I think that regardless of the fact, and it will be cold comfort to the family involved, but that there has been errors here, and it's caused a great deal of difficulty.
Yeah, and just very quickly, Carole, just a former missing person.
The police were specifically asked if Nicola was suffered from depression or any other underlying conditions, and they chose at that point not to tell anyone. Why did they do that? They should. That would have changed the way they are searching for her if they had released that information. But they were asked specifically, and they said no, which means they're hiding things.
Yes, and the paper just quoting a former missing persons expert at Scotland Yard saying the failure by police to state earlier why they thought Miss Bulley had drowned had created an unnecessary circus. We have run out of time in this section, so I'm going to thank you both for the moment, and we are going to take a break. Stay right where you are. Coming up, A&E and intensive care nurses are to strike for the first time. We'll discuss that and more coming up. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Carole Malone and David Clegg. There they both are. Let us have a look at the Courier. Who should we go to on this story? David, why don't you have a go? I think you've heard of this newspaper. This is the story about the Perthshire MSP saying that it's time for a fresh perspective, not throwing his hat into the ring. This is John Swinney.
Yeah, this is John Swinney, the Deputy First Minister of Scotland, a close confidant of Nicola Sturgeon's for many years, someone who has been a fixture on the Scottish political scene for decades. He was, in fact, leader of the SNP between 2000 and 2004, prior to Alex Salmond taking that position. So there had, I think, been a lot of people who were looking for stability in the SNP after Nicola Sturgeon's shock resignation yesterday, looking perhaps to John Swinney as someone who could be a voice of consistency, of stability, who could keep the show on the roads. So I think my newspaper interviewed him this morning, and I think even he was surprised, not only by how many people had contacted him asking him to do that, but also the fact that he had been quite tempted, because I think it's fair to say that his first experience of leader of the SNP was not something that he particularly enjoyed, perhaps. So I think which is a big story. It's a great exclusive for us to have on our front page tomorrow. And I think one of the things it shows is that this SNP leadership contest following Nicola Sturgeon's departure, it is going to have a lot of new ideas, a lot of new faces. Nicola Sturgeon obviously came in 2014 as First Minister after Alex Salmond without a contest. It's been quite a while since the party has had a public conversation about direction, about how they should pursue the case for independence. So one of the things that they were worried about perhaps is about how divisive it will be, whether there will be public bloodletting, because we know there's a range of issues on which there's disagreement, and if they can present a united front again to the Scottish public running up to the general election and their desire to pursue a second independence referendum. The fact that John Swinney's not going to be there, I think, shows that it's going to be new faces, and there's very interesting weeks and months ahead as that proceeds.
Yes, he's quoted in your paper as saying, to create the space for that fresh perspective to emerge, I've decided not to be a candidate for leadership in the SNP. And Carole, my question to you is that fresh perspective, might that mean no referendum on independence?
Yeah, I think for now the independence dream is dead. I mean, I think it's, the most recent polls, and one of the reasons that Nicola had jumped before she was pushed, recent polls said 44% of people still wanted independence, but 56% didn't. So I think it would be foolhardy of any new leader to jump in now and start campaigning for independence right away. I think it's going to be put on hold for a while. And rightly so, the Scottish people, Sturgeon never took the debate anymore. Scotland is in exactly the same place now in terms of polls as it was before after the 2014 referendum. 56% said no to independence. So she has achieved nothing in terms of that. So the country is as divided now as it was then. So it definitely needs a fresh perspective. She was a very divisive character, I think. And I think she wasn't just divisive between Scotland and England. I mean, I resented her for driving a wedge between England and Scotland, but I think she drove a wedge between the Scottish people because she wasn't listening to what people who weren't nationalists wanted. And, I have so much contact with the Unionists of Scotland, and they tell me all the time that what she wanted for Scotland, it's not what they wanted. So I think whoever over the reins is going to have a tough job. I think the toughest job they're going to have is to try and repair a Scotland that she has literally wrecked over the past 8 years. The budget deficit is 12% of GDP, twice what the UK is as a whole. You mentioned in one of your things before that the drug-related deaths is 3 times higher than any other country in Europe, one of the worst in the world's developed countries. She's reduced life expectancy there. She said her mission was to close the gap between the rich and the poor. It's wider than ever. She was going to create a new energy company. She hasn't done that. She has failed on every level. And I don't know how she's got away with being leader as long as she has. I don't know whether this is a fervour of nationalism. I don't know.
Yeah, well, she survived 8 years. We are going to have to leave it there. We've run over time. We didn't manage to get to the metro, but that just on the escalation of the dispute with the nurses and emergency intensive care units being brought into that dispute and a 48-hour walkout. Carole and David, for the moment, thank you.